This is Father Patrick Briscoe.
This is Father Joseph Anthony Kress.
Welcome to Godsplaining. Thanks to all those who support us. If you enjoy the show, please consider making a donation to us on Patreon. Be sure to like and subscribe to Godsplaining wherever you listen to your podcasts. Father Joseph Anthony, I was thinking that we would play a game of yes or no.
Oh, gosh.
To start this episode.
No.
No, but the answer is yes.
Yes, of
for
course,
the game.
yes. Always yes.
So in yes or no, as far as I understand it, now you know more about these things
A little
than
bit.
I do, but in yes or no, as far as I understand it, the host proposes a thing and the one responding simply answers yes or no to the thing.
Understood. Simple game. Children's game, maybe, if you want to call it that.
Do you want to give context?
No.
So just cold yes or no.
Yes.
All right. Macaroni and cheese.
Yes.
Driving fast on the highway.
Yes.
Vegetables.
No.
Hard no. I'm glad no is all you said there. Okay, what about something a little bit deeper? The rosary.
Hell yes.
The Divine Mercy Chaplet.
Yes.
Oh, plot twist.
Yes. Very much.
Interesting.
Very much yes.
Okay, I didn't see that coming. What about the Servite Chaplet?
No, because I don't know what that is.
First Fridays.
Yes.
Very nice.
I'm not as diligent as I probably should be, but yes, very much yes.
Oh, there we go. So, friends, as you're probably seeing, in this game of yes or no, we started with some lighter things.
Fun, frivolous things.
Fun, frivolous. You got a couple fun facts about Father Joseph Anthony in there, if I do say so myself. Those were real answers, according to my knowledge in my Rolodex. What I should have said was, oh wait, one more. Taco Bell.
Yes, absolutely.
There we go.
You mean C?
Yes. Excellent. Perfect. Yep. Fourth meal.
Oh, so good.
Fire
it's
sauce.
So good. Yeah. The cravings box, the $5 cravings box, you can get yourself a steak chalupa, a beefy cheesy 5-layer burrito, and cheesy fiesta potatoes, and a large Sierra Mist, or I believe they call it Starry now. $5 at any time of day.
This episode is not
It's
underwritten by Taco Bell, so that's enough Taco Bell time. This episode is actually about devotions, which is what we were getting to in yes or no before I got myself.
I kind of do have a devotion to Taco Bell. Like that is actually
Small D.
Yeah. It is a devotion I have.
So I think it's really important that we talk about devotions, because if there's one thing we Catholics are known for in our spiritual life, especially compared to our Protestant brethren, it would be our devotions.
Yep.
And the ways that Catholics pray looks and feels fundamentally different, especially to many converts. So I wonder if you wanted to kick us off by just explaining, first of all, what we mean when we use the word devotion.
Yeah, when we talk about devotions within the Catholic life, we kind of begin to split hairs, if you will. And that there's this kind of like distinction between like what most people I think would experience as more formulaic prayer life or worship, and devotions that have, let's say, maybe a structure to it, but are varied in a certain way. So I think a lot of people, when they look at the Catholic Church and the living out of the Catholic faith, say like there are certain things that are very like structured, organized, maybe even governed in a certain sense, like the liturgy and our sacramental participation. Versus devotions, like as a noun, thinking these kind of personal prayer practices. And for, I think, a lot of our Protestant brothers and sisters, a lot of their spirituality is heavily devotional in the sense that it is varied in that sense, but there's not like a governed kind of set expectations of how to pray and worship and things like that. Now, as with everything in our human life, the virtue's in the middle, right? We should be able to include both. And if we lean too heavily on one side or the other, then we're kind of negligent and not living in a fullness. So what we would like to talk about in this episode is that there's kind of more personalized, varied aspects of a prayer life that we would consider devotionals or devotions. and look at that side of the spiritual life, because for Catholics, it's very easy to focus on, the sacraments or the liturgy as beautiful acts of worship and prayer life. But sometimes we maybe don't, or we have a robust tradition of devotions and devotionals, but we want to make sure that we understand what they are, what their place is in our Catholic faith, so that they can flourish alongside and maybe even strengthen our kind of liturgical worship or sacramental worship in that way.
That was a really great response, because you laid out a lot of different things that I want to get to in this episode. So I think we could begin with one of the first points, by just clarifying again more specifically the way that a devotion is different from liturgical prayer, right? So the church, whenever we have a question, right, there's a pretty good chance the church has said something about this, and even said something about this recently. So
Yes.
For all of you who like to follow along with footnotes from Godsplaining, the church has an entire document on devotions that was produced in 2001. It's called the Directory of Popular Piety, released by the congregation. We call them dicasteries now. Then the dicastery just means department, essentially. But the congregation is a division of the Vatican. So the Congregation for Divine Worship, that is the division of the Vatican that oversees how we pray, divine worship, right? Released this text, the Directory of Popular Piety, that has a lot of information, actually, about the spiritual life and about devotions. So that document defines devotion as, get this,
There we go.
various external practices, for example, prayers, hymns, observances attached to particular times or places, insignia, medals, habits, or customs, animated, I think that means both the things people wear and the things they do,
I was going to
just for
say,
the record. Animated by an attitude of faith, such external practices manifest the particular relationship of the faithful with the divine persons, or the Blessed Virgin Mary in her privileges of grace, and those of her titles which express them, or with the saints in their configuration with Christ, or their role in the church's life.
That's a lot to break down. Right
Exactly.
there.
No,
but it's really beautiful.
So it just kind of clarifies everything, because a devotion, it seems like a very numinous term, and you realize we're talking about, and this explains in part why Protestants might have a kind of visceral reaction. We are in fact talking about external dispositions, right? We're talking about various external practices. That's the beginning of the church's understanding of what a devotion is. It's an external practice, and this is so important to understand from the outset, because people might have a tendency to poo-poo these things. And I think this is ridiculous, because of course we are bodies and souls, and we have to pray with both. So an external practice, such as a set phrase of words which one can pronounce out loud, or even if you simply move your lips when you're praying the rosary, for example, it can make a big difference. But an external practice, something you do, can help you pray. So to hold a rosary, to move your hands along the beads, to make a genuflection, to piously move your arms and hands when you make the sign of the cross. All these are external practices. Wearing, as it mentions in the definition, wearing a medal. Other particular habits or customs, meaning particular practices that are developed by the faithful. Okay, all of this shapes prayer life in a real way. Now that's different than liturgical prayer.
Yeah.
And you were kind of getting to this in your answer.
Yeah.
So Father Joseph Andy, why don't you take us deeper into that distinction between what a devotion is? Because the rosary is not the liturgy as we understand the liturgy in the life of the church.
No. I mean, we even use that word devotion in kind of common parlance or secular, if we want to call it secular terms, like he's devoted to that person, or he's devoted to his work. And I think we use that term to mean dedicated, right? He's diligent, he's dedicated in his hobby or his task, or, he's devoted to his spouse. Like that this person has a certain prominence and role and so I think in our common day speak, we use devoted or devotion almost interchangeable with dedicated, right? And it's not too far off when we look at this. And these external practices kind of express this dedication or this devotion that we have, and whether that is to the divine persons themselves, right? A litany of the Sacred Heart is a devotion to the second person of the Trinity in the Sacred Heart of Jesus Christ, or to his mother in the Rosary, or in other areas, medals with different saints and things like that. Now, why do we look at that and value that, encourage that, right? But you make this really important thing with how does that differ than the liturgy? Because the liturgy has a certain formula to it, but so too does the rosary. The rosary has a structure to it. So you can't just say, well, one's structured and one's like free form. Like, a litany has a structure. You say there's a call and response type structure to it. So it's not just simply bare bones of saying, well, liturgical worship is structured, formulaic worship, but devotionals are just kind of personal free form things. It's not as much as that. The liturgy, when we talk about the liturgy within the church, is the official public prayer of the church. So I think one of the best things to understand when we talk about liturgical worship is, yes, it is kind of, I've used this term before, but it is governed by the church because it's the prayer of the bride of Christ.
Right.
And that is the official prayer, how the church expresses her relationship as bride to her bridegroom. So when we think of liturgical prayer, we need to think about the bride speaking, the bride in conversation with her bridegroom in those types of ways. And so when we look at the liturgical prayer, it's, yes, the official kind of codified expression of this relationship between the bride of Christ, the mystical body as the church, right? Governed, inspired, guided by the Holy Spirit as the bride of Christ, speaking to the Father in these ways. But that it has a certain kind of gravity to that. And so it has to be kind of sound, filtered, distilled in a beauty that we can be confident in. And to be able to be kind of a refuge for us and a guiding light. The age-old phrase is the law of prayer of love is the law of belief. Lex orandi, lex credendi, that we look to the prayers of the liturgy to be the true expression of the faith. And this might be a tension that we come up again and again with devotions and liturgical prayer, is that it's the expression of this interior faith. And sometimes, for those of us who at points of our lives and our spiritual life maybe struggle with doubts and questions, we actually look to the prayers of the church in her liturgy to maybe even cause that faith in us, to give clarity to it. Now, that's a beautiful and very important and almost inviolable place to be.
Right.
And devotions have a similar role, but they don't carry that same gravity and weight.
Right. And I think that's very well said because, of course, one of the objections to devotions is that because they're more personal, as you're saying, as opposed to the public and formal ritual of the church, is that people say that devotions distract from one's relationship with Christ.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, it's exactly the opposite. A devotion is supposed to animate one's relationship with Christ. So a devotion inflames it and builds it up and gives it life. So it doesn't distract from a relationship with Christ, or at least it's not supposed to. And we can get into that a little bit more later, because if it becomes distracting, then it's a kind of thing that has to be reassessed. A devotion is supposed to animate and build up and lift up and encourage and enliven one's relationship with Christ. It's supposed to be in service to it. And that's an important principle. Now, of course, again, when we're talking about devotions, we're talking about things like the Rosary, the Divine Mercy Chaplet, novenas.
Yep, litanies. I'm trying to think of other, medals, scapulars.
I mentioned First Fridays, like the Sacred Heart devotion, the wearing of a particular medal, right? Devotions to particular saints. Often that's what the medals signify.
Right.
So if you call upon your patron saint, for example, you pray regularly to your patron saint, which you should. That would be a devotion. Some people describe having a devotion to their guardian angel.
Yeah.
They say, pray to my angel. And I look to my angel for help in my prayer. I call out to my angel when I'm facing particular temptations. All of that's particular devotion. So Father Joseph Anthony, you've got a whole menu of these things. And maybe even today, it's becoming more aggressive. Like Catholics have more opportunity to discover these devotions than ever before because of this little thing called the internet.
Interwebs.
Yeah, that's right.
It's a series of tubes. I don't know if you know about that.
Yes. Sometimes the tubes get clogged.
They do.
Thank you for finishing my sandwich just then. But one can be assaulted by this, and I don't mean to make too light of something that could really be a struggle for people.
Yeah.
You say, I've got all of these things, and I feel like I'm not as good a Catholic as I ought to be because I don't do them all. So let's start with first, how do you choose a particular devotion? How is it that one picks up a devotion? How is it the devotions come into your life?
Yeah, I think that whole concept of like we have so many devotions, like I need to treat devotions like they're Pokemon. Like I got to catch them all. Like I got to do all of them, right? And it's like I increase my holiness, I increase my spiritual life by sheer quantity. So the more devotions I do, the more holy I will become. And that is a fallacy, right? We love quality over quantity. That's okay, And there are certain devotions that are almost tried and true through the history and the tradition of the church.
Right.
The tried and true devotions, things like the Rosary, right? Things like the Stations of the Cross, things that the different litanies that have been handed down. And I think it's okay to almost take a pause in a moment and do some self-reflection and self-knowledge about which devotions am I just generally attracted to. There's, like I said, there are certain ones that are tried and true through the tradition that we should be very confident that if we engage in these devotions, praying the Rosary daily or things like that, it will assist our union with God. And in that way. But there are also sometimes that there are very particular devotions because of the individual, of who they are, where they come from, their heritage, their life experiences, their state of life. And I don't think we should be afraid to watch devotions kind of come and go from our life at different times as well.
Right.
And I think that's one of the things that we should be free to engage devotions, certain ones that maybe pique our interest, to start to pray that and engage with that. But sometimes that means this new devotion is piquing my interest. I'm becoming a little more dedicated, devoted to it. But that might mean another devotion slowly fades away. You don't need to keep stacking them on top of each other. Sometimes you can have multiple and, it's good to have a little bit of variety, but don't be afraid to say like, well, I started this one devotion, but then I lost this other one. Now I have to do that and this, and then let's, add this other one because I just got to keep going. It's like, actually not be afraid that as my life, as I, an individual, grow and mature and go through different stages of life, that my prayer life actually reflects that kind of maturity and adjustment and change of life as well through different ways.
Yeah, so I think it's very interesting the way that devotions first arise in our lives. And, among the many great points you made just then, I think personal affinity is a big one.
Huge one.
And some Catholics are afraid of this, right? I'm noticing this trend, especially, I don't want to call anybody out, but all you Gen Z types out there, but especially you Gen Z types are afraid to have like feelings in your religious life, in your life of faith.
Got the
you're
feels,
afraid
man.
to be attached to something, to really desire it as a good, to understand that the passions are truly good things,
Yes.
and that they lead us to God. Now they need to be moderated,
Right.
and curbed and ordered according to what is actually true, good, and beautiful, right? But they're indicators of how we ought to live. So this point that you were making about personal affinity is a very good one to underscore what actually speaks to you. Do you feel drawn to a particular saint, a particular mystery of the faith, a particular aspect of Christ's life? All that's very important because that is the sort of thing that is real and can't be faked. So I think a danger is that someone hears about a devotion, someone hears that a particular friend is very interested in a particular devotion, and immediately you can feel a sort of pressure in the spiritual life to love it too.
Yes.
And if you don't actually love it, if it's a devotion, you don't have to.
Well, I think
some people say, Father, I'd love to pray the Rosary, but it just doesn't do anything for me. You're not a bad Catholic.
Yeah.
That's okay.
That's okay. And this
Take
is
it or
coming from
leave it.
Dominicans who we are very much devoted to the Rosary, #Dominican Rosary Pilgrimage. But there's also that reverse side of that exact same coin, where you find somebody who is like so just convicted
Right.
of a devotion,
Right.
you know, you have to have the devotion to the 6-star upon the crown of Our Lady in Revelation 12, you know, and you don't understand, like, this will revolutionize your life. You have to do this. And it's like, I mean, the precepts of the church are that I go to mass on Sundays, receive once a year, and go to confession, you know, once a year. Like that's actually what I have to do.
Right.
Right. And so I think the pressure of watching a colleague, a friend, a peer of mine become devoted to a certain practice, you know, or a medal or a saint. And I feel like I need to the implicit pressure to do that. But sometimes the reverse side of that is the explicit pressure. Somebody who's so convicted of this, like this specific devotion, you know, I'll use one from my life. I love the Litany of Surrender. It kicked my rear end a number of years ago, and I'm very grateful for that devotion coming into my life at the time that it did. Now, it has actually stayed a very stable part of my life, and I use that prayer on a regular basis and with my own personal adaptations to it. And I do encourage it, but I don't look at other people and say, you have to do this. You don't understand life until you do this 13 times a day. It's called the Litany of Surrender, and you can't force devotions. And I think that's the thing that we have to get to.
Yeah.
Looking at devotions it's a beautiful treasury that we have in our faith, but we can't force it upon people. Just like we can't force love upon each other. Because at the end of the day, that's what this is about, is animating our life of charity. And you can't force that upon somebody.
That's such a good point, because you can actually create a tension there where there shouldn't be one, because you need to curb your enthusiasm and bring it back a little bit, and not put someone in a particular position where he or she feels like that they're defective or that there's something wrong with them because they don't have the same zeal for a particular devotion that you yourself have. So it's something to be conscious of in the way that we share our faith, that we do so in a way that's inviting and doesn't make someone feel like he's going to go to hell if he doesn't pray the rosary every day.
Right.
By the way, Our Lady promises that you won't if you pray the rosary every day, just saying. So I think another aspect, and this is something you threw out there too, Father Joseph Anthony, is that there's just not enough time to do all the things.
No.
So what are some of the parameters that we would say for assessing whether or not something really has a place in one's life? What does that look like to make that decision?
I've always found that it's very important to actually kind of take an evaluation of your state of life. What are the natural obligations that you have?
Right.
Are you responsible for caring for a family? Do you have a job? And it might be a high demand job, right? Like that's actually a real obligation you need to take count of in your life. And the Lord never wants us to, blow up our life in anything. He wants us to be faithful to the obligations of the state of life that he has placed us. And that may mean that we are unable to engage with the devotions at the level we would like. And so to do kind of an honest evaluation of my current state of life, what are my natural obligations and demands? And then what am I able to participate in? You know, I find working with college students quite often is they don't ever realize it at the time, because you ask a college student like, hey, how you doing? Oh gosh, I'm so busy. I got so much to do, you know? And it's like, yeah, we all are busy. Okay, that's cute. But then they graduate and they, do a few years of professional work, and they're like, I never realized how easy it was, because I had a chance to go to mass every day and do my holy hours every day and all these types of things. And like when you're in a 9-to-5 workplace and you have a 45-minute commute every day, you may not be able to do that.
All of that's going to change.
Shout
out to you listening to this podcast on your commute right now.
Yeah, exactly. Shout out to our commuters. Shout out. So having that ability to say what is within my possibility, right? And it may be what's possible is I need to wake up 30 minutes early every day to get my devotional prayer in before I start. Now, because it's not as easily kind of woven into my day, maybe I have to make some intentional sacrifices to prioritize that. I do believe that everybody should have a devotional life.
Ooh, that's good.
Okay. That is different than our liturgical life.
Right.
Right? I believe that.
So if you have nothing, you should cultivate something.
Yes.
I agree with that.
Now, what that specifically looks like is going to be tailored to, like I said, your natural obligations. But just to say, like, okay, well, my life's pretty demanding right now. I'll just, go through the motions, or I'll kind of push this to the side, and I do my masses, and I think that's enough. It's like, no, we need to have an additional life. Now that can kind of adjust and change as our state of life changes, but we do need to have an intentional devotional life that we engage with regularly.
One of the things you threw out is that things change depending on the season of life.
Yeah.
And I think that this is a good point to make, because this is one of the points of congress potentially with devotions and with the liturgy. I don't pray the Stations of the Cross outside of Lent.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really like the Stations of the Cross.
Neither do I.
It's not something I'm drawn to. But I have found that for me, it's a very fruitful exercise to pray them, especially on Fridays during Lent.
Mm-hmm.
So I do it partly as a special Lenten penance.
Yes.
Irish, Catholic, bad feelings are good, all of that, et cetera, et cetera.
I feel good when I feel bad.
Exactly. I pick it up in that season of life, and I put it down as soon as Easter comes. Thank God. Set that away. Doesn't come back till last
Stations
Wednesday.
of the Resurrection we can move into. Yeah.
So like it's okay to move them out, but apart from that, and you were getting at this when you were talking about the state in life, looking at that phrase "season of life" in a bigger way.
Yeah,
There's some times where a particular devotion is going to speak to you. In a moment of difficulty, to be praying the litany of trust every day would be a really good pattern. To be assured of God's goodness and of His love for you, and to build up your hope and your trust in Him. But you may not need that once you move through that particular season of difficulty, right? So I think, again, it's important for people to understand that it's okay for devotions to come and go.
Yes.
And that part of that is natural, part of that is built in to the liturgy itself, the church's public prayer, and that our personal prayer, our private devotions, can model that. Now, one thing we haven't really made a big deal of is that some devotions are approved and some aren't. Mm-hmm. So when you're choosing devotion, this is a very important criteria. So I wonder if you would say a little bit about that. What does it mean for a devotion to be approved?
Yeah.
What can that kind of look like?
I think one of the things that we look at when we talk about kind of approved devotions are those devotions that have kind of, I don't want to say stood the test of time, but like have been seen to be in coherence with the faith itself. That maybe the prayers that are written or the structure of it is actually theologically sound with our Catholic faith, right? So to make sure that the content that is, once again, like I said, specifically with the liturgy, but we can also apply this to devotions. The law of prayer is law of belief. And so are these prayers expressing the true beliefs that we have in the faith, right? And quite often, a lot of these devotions, as they become kind of solidified in a cultural expression, they get submitted to authorities, first at the diocesan level, and then beyond that at a national level or a Vatican level. And quite often at that point, there's an official kind of signing off on, like, this is able to be depended upon. Like, this devotion we can be confidently praying this, as it will be effective in expressing the faith and helping the individual to grow in their faith that it engages. So when we talk about those approved devotions, that's kind of what we're talking about there. Mm-hmm. Now, there are a lot of very personal devotions. I have little phrases that I use that personally mean a lot to me that I have not yet submitted to my bishop, right? But it's...
this is a family show. You can't say those on.
Yes,
on air.
Exactly. No, no. So, like, I think there's a difference in recognizing what is part of my own, like, personal spiritual life, but also what are my personal devotions that are engaging in approved devotions that I can be confident in that way. So I know I'm kind of like rambling and talking around a little bit of it, but like when we talk about approved devotions, we want to make sure that what is being prayed is in coherence with the faith itself.
No, you gave the two essential criteria, right? Sometimes things are demonstrated by the graces they give through the tradition. That would be like the rosary,
right?
Where you have, miraculous events being brought about in the world through the Virgin Mary's intercession. like the miracle of the sun,
Yep.
the victory of the Battle of Lepanto.
Lepanto,
There are many other wonders that have been brought by the Rosary. So you have the testimony of tradition, and then sometimes the church speaks very clearly to authorize or not a particular devotion, and you can look for that. Just look at it. Sometimes on holy cards there will be nihil obstat. There'll be another kind of declaration of approbation
That's the phrase,
by a bishop.
it's a Latin phrase, but when you see that, whether it's a book written on the theological virtue or moral life, you'll see nihil obstat. You may see it on prayer cards. And that means that this prayer has been submitted and investigated to be in coherence with the faith.
And so that's an important thing, because all of us need to submit the things we love to the judgment of the church.
Yeah.
And to trust that if something's feeling a little bit awkward, if you think, oh, there's something not quite right about this prayer that I'm seeing, or this particular understanding of the Virgin Mary, or something like that, to not be afraid to investigate it, and then to move on past it if you find out that there's something problematic about it.
Right.
So I think it's very important, because as many of you who are listening or watching us on YouTube are probably aware, there's a lot of weird stuff out there.
Yeah.
So when
just because you find it on the interwebs,
when it
doesn't
comes to
necessarily
the
mean
devotional
it's-
life, it is important to be aware of what the church thinks about a particular practice.
Yep.
And you could bring that up in confession, bring it up to a confessor. If you have a spiritual director, raise it to your confessor. Ask around, ask your friends, see what they think, and be prepared again, to listen to the judgment of the church on these things, and to have a kind of flexibility in the spiritual life. As we wrap up, Father Joseph Anthony, any last thoughts on devotions?
Any last thoughts on devotions? Yeah, I think kind of like what I was saying earlier is, as Catholics, it seems to be a caricature of our life, is that we have all these random devotions to the most absurd thing, devoted to the left toenail of the Lord upon the cross and things like that, we will find the smallest and most ridiculous things to be like super devoted to. But that's actually beautiful and good. And that it allows us to recognize the great diversity in the church, because she is a church for all members and all nations. And that is to be actually celebrated in beautiful ways. And to not be afraid for our listeners to actually find those particular devotions that are speaking to them and that are helpful for their spiritual life at those times, and to claim that and say, yeah, I really love this prayer, and that has been very beneficial to me. And to watch as other prayers come and go in your life, but to have a healthy, strong devotional life is part of that kind of rhythm and flow.
Amen. Well said. Well, thanks, friends, for joining us today. As we wrap up, just one quick announcement. We are looking forward to a day of recollection that we're hosting in the great Diocese of Nashville. That will be on January 18th. It's going to be a really great thing. So you can find out more information about that day of recollection on godsplaining.org. Thanks for listening to this episode of Godsplaining. Be sure to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. Like, subscribe, leave a 5-star review. If you'd like to donate to our podcast through Patreon, follow the link in the description. You can also follow links in our show notes to shop Godsplaining merch and to get information on upcoming Godsplaining events like that Day of Recollection in Nashville on January 18th. Friends, please know that we're praying for you, and we ask that you would pray for us. God bless.
Father Bonaventure, if you had to choose between getting Warby Parker glasses, subscribing to a YouTube channel, or flossing your teeth, what would you choose?
Oof. I guess, to be honest, subscribing to a YouTube channel.
See, folks, it's not as bad as flossing your teeth or getting Warby Parker glasses. Please subscribe to Godsplaining. Cheers.